Black man. Is that what she did? Congresswoman? Hey, Congresswoman Mercedes. Hey, give her a big hand. That's my Congresswoman. I'm not even from Michigan. I was in Corbin, Kentucky, where they alleged they racially profiled a man, said he had done something, and in less than 2 days, they packed up every black man, woman, and child, put them on a rail car, and said, "Don't ever come back." And racists have used, ever since that day, and pitted black folk against poor white folk in those hills, and made them think that their problems are because of certain things coming to black and brown people. And we were just there the other day organizing because some folk are waking up. It was 1919. There was the removal of price controls. There was unemployment. There was inflation that was beginning to creep into the American society because of the greed and the monopolization of industry. And then America elected a racist to the White House. I said 1919. Actually, had been elected in 1914, but in 1919, he was beginning his second term. He was a racist, he was a narcissist, he had been president of Princeton University, governor of New Jersey. Racism is not just a southern matter. He was spewing division. He was lifting up revisionist history. And he was glorifying white nationalism in 1919. And this president said, the American Negro returning from abroad would be the greatest medium in conveying Bolshevism to America. In other words, fear the returning American soldier, because they are the conduit for socialism and communism, because that has always, especially in the 20th century, that has always been the curse word, the label you put on anybody that believes in justice. All of this chaos, all of this racism from the White House. The president at that time, 100 years before Banner was in the White House, the president in early 1900s had played the movie Birth of a Nation in the White House to all of his staff and declared that this was the history that America needed to operate on. And in the midst of that, somebody decided we need to do the ACLU. The only way we can address this is by doing the ACLU. And the ACLU, for me tonight, means the only way you can address certain moments in history is you have to act, you have to challenge, you have to love, and you have to unite. That's doing the ACLU. And here we are 100 years later. 23 states in the United States of America since 2010, 6 years before Trump or Russia, passed racist voter suppression laws that impacts 54% of all African Americans. But here is the rub that isn't often talked about even in the media. If you do an analysis of the states that have passed racist voter suppression laws, and I want to keep saying before Russia, before Trump, because we need to understand what Neil Painter said, that Trump is not the problem, he's the symptom. I knew I wasn't going to get too many claps for that. Because the danger of America is we keep wanting to isolate racism into somebody who's crazy when racism is a part and parcel of who America is. And by racism, we're not necessarily talking about those who call you the N-word or say a bunch of crazy words. Kendi, in his new book on Stamped from the Beginning, lets us know that oftentimes the words are the distraction. In some ways, the most racist person in Washington, D.C. right now in the nation is Mitch McConnell. He's saying an ugly word. But racism is about policy, not just about name calling. How many lawyers in here know what I'm talking about? Racism is about disparate treatment under the law. Racism is about defying equal protection under the law for everybody. So you can be quiet and be a racist. You can be black and be a racist. Because if you're black and an elected officer and you vote with those who are engaged in policy that have disparate treatment, at best you are an enabler of racism. At worst you are a racist joined up with white nationalism. Here we are. And do you know, we did an analysis in the Poor People's Campaign and we found out that every state that passes racist voter suppression laws, just like it has always been, the people who get elected using racist voter suppression laws, once they get elected, they use their power to hurt mostly poor white folk. I knew that before too well, so let me prove it. Because I don't believe being loud and wrong. We did a study and looked at poverty. And we found out that every state that is a racist voter suppression state is a high poverty state. I didn't say black poverty, high poverty state, a denial of living wage state, a denial of health care state, an attack public education state, an attack LGBTQ people state, an attack women's rights state. So that all you have to know is that a state has tried to engage in racist voter suppression and in some way succeeded. There is almost a correlation to the causation. And so if that's true, which we've shown it to be true, our economists and others did a study for us called The Soul of Poor Folk, and auditing America 50 years after the original Poor People's Campaign. And we found out that there are not 39 million poor people in America. There are 140 million poor and low-income people in America. And 66 million of them are white. 26 million of them are black. Now here's the rub. That 26 million black represents 61% of black people. That 66 million white only represents about 30% of white people. So in terms of percentage, there are more black people as a part of their race that are poor and low wealth. But in terms of raw numbers, there are more poor whites in raw numbers. That any time the demographic shift, I'm paraphrasing it now from a speech he did at the end of December, the Montgomery March, he said anytime there is the potential for poor whites and poor blacks to form together demographically to build political power, the greedy, racist aristocracy always sows division. Here we are. For instance, in this state, 51% of all residents, black residents, have cities living under emergency management. That's racism. Spending in our federal prisons has gone up 10 times since 1976. That is a form of systemic racism. Native American people are still considered wards of the state. They can get casinos, but they can't get brand new housing and schools. That's a form of systemic racism. 58,000 people in prison, over 55% of the people of color, black residents in Michigan, incarcerated at 6 times the rate of white residents. That's a form of racism, systemic racism. Resegregation of our public schools, form of racism. 100 years later. 100 years later, as I said, there are 140 million poor and low-income people in the United States, 39 million children. 39 million children. And 7 people died from vaping, and we called it a national emergency. Because it was here at Grosse Pointe that Dr. King did a speech a few days before he was shot, talking about 2 Americans, 1968. When one innocent, unarmed black person gets shot by a racist cop, we hit the streets, and we should. But 100 years later, 250,000 people die every year from poverty. 600 a day. And you can hardly get a candidate running for president to even say the word poverty at 3 events, if they ever say it. They say working class. And 43% of the people in this country are poor and low wealth. $300 and $400 away from bankruptcy and deep hurt. Michigan, 41% of the people are poor and low wealth. 4 million residents. This is not a marginal issue. It's not just a black issue. 50% of all the children in Michigan. The majority of the poor people in Michigan are white people, 2.7 million. 36% of all white people, 58% of all people of color, 1.4 million. In Michigan, 100 years later, after you began doing the ACLU, 60 million people in this country work for less than $15 an hour. 2 million people in Michigan's workforce work for less than $15 an hour. 46% of Michigan's workforce. That's why I went somewhere and some preachers got mad with me because I said it's a shame and a disgrace for a preacher to ask members to tithe and then won't get in the street and fight for them to have a living wage. There's something wrong. I just don't believe Jesus would be this quiet in the midst of all of this kind of economic pain. That the truth be told, even the media doesn't want to talk about it. 100 years later, 30-some million people that don't have health care, even though every congressperson and senator and governor that works to block people's health care gets free health care themselves, paid for by us. I had one congressman say, no. They said, I don't get free health care, I pay for it. I said, well, with whose money? You pay for it with the money that we pay you. So how in the world can you have something and not want your constituents to have at least what you have? And in Michigan, 600,000 people are still uninsured. 600,000 people. There's not a county in the country. There's not a county in the country, nowhere in this country, where you can pay for, afford a 2-bedroom apartment on minimum wage. Not one. In Michigan, you have to work 73 hours a week in Michigan at minimum wage to possibly afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Yes, Flint. And thank God for the work you've done in Flint. Thank God for the continuation of what you're doing in Flint. And we pray, God, that the day will come that people will be held criminally charged for what they've done in Flint. Because you fluid community, they'd already be charged. Well, let us also not forget that 4 million families get up every morning and can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. And across this country, 14 million families can't even afford water. And that in Michigan, 25% of the census tracts are at risk for being unable to afford water. 100 years later. We're not blocking European immigrants, we're blocking immigrants from the well. Maybe we ought to correct that lie and stop saying that Mexicans are immigrants. We ought to correct that lie. Let's correct that lie. How are you an immigrant when you're coming to a land that that nation stole from you? Henry David Thoreau's first act of civil disobedience was refusal to pay taxes because the Mexican-American War was nothing but a made-up war to take land from the Mexican people because Mexico was anti-slavery. And the Texans wanted to keep their slaves, and then they said, we might as well pick up the gold and the oil of California. So how do you call somebody an alien when they're only returning to their own land? Abraham Lincoln stood up against the Mexican-American War before he was president. And so, we've got to correct some lies 100 years later. But what we learn from this history is that every time there's a problem, somebody makes the immigrants to blame. In 1919, it was the European immigrants. 100 years later, it's children in cages. And when I was in El Paso, they told us some stories we haven't heard, like children having to have their shoelaces taken from them because of the traumatic syndrome they're experiencing from the separation. Some had begun to try to hang themselves. 100 years later. 100 years later, we've got 800 military bases around the world. And we currently spend 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar on the military and only 15 cents on poverty, infrastructure, and education. We could cut the military budget by $350 billion, and we would still be spending more on our military than China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea combined. That any nation that is driven by militarism, because the money ain't going to the soldiers, it's going to the military contractors. The average combat soldier only makes about $30,000 a year, while the average CEO of a defense contract company makes about 19 million. And one contract, one military contractor could, for 1 year, could fund all of the Medicaid expansion for all 14 states that didn't expand. And Congressman, some people told me don't talk like this, don't talk about it, you got to tell the truth. Dr. King said any nation that focuses more emphasis on militarism than lifting up the people is following the trail of every fallen empire that has ever existed in history. And what is an empire? When your military spending determines everything. That's the definition of an empire. And so here we are 100 years later. And in the midst of this, we've had a presidential election in 2016 where a person really didn't win. We gotta stop saying that too. That was a manipulator. I'm not talking about Russia, I'm talking about the Electoral College. Voter suppression. The Electoral College has worked 4 times in American history, and every time it was bad. Bad in 1877, it was bad in 2000, it was bad in 2016. Every time the Electoral College has determined that somebody has won the presidency and not won the popular vote, it's been bad. And we know that it was 88,000 votes or so, 80,000 votes. Thank God for the work the ACLU is doing to open up voting in Michigan for the next election. And while I'm nonpartisan right now, hopefully the Democrats will have learned their lesson and stop trying to build a blue wall and just run a whole America campaign and fight for the votes everywhere, west, east, north, and south. But because of the manipulation, 100 years later, we right back. We got a racist, narcissist, divider-in-chief, and a whole cohort of enablers. I call them 3 M's: McConnell, Meadows, and McCarthy. McConnell in the Senate, Meadows from North Carolina, and McCarthy in the Congress. And the other day, they voted to go public of the investigation around impeachment. Hallelujah. But I came tonight to say that's inside the Congress. And God knows I hope they work inside the Congress. But 100 years later, after you were founded, we need to start understanding that outside the Congress, we need to do the ACLU. We need to act, we need to challenge, we need to love, and we need to unite. All over, everybody. We need to put down our petty differences between organizations and to understand that there are forces out here trying to hurt us all, and there's never been a time for us to act and challenge and love and unite and come together. I often say about it like this: the same politicians that support voter suppression are the same ones that deny health care, the same ones that deny living wages, are the same ones that hurt the gay community, are the same ones that block climate control and climate and dealing with climate change, are the same ones that hurt public education, are the same ones that vote in ways that creates more mass incarceration. And if they are cynical enough to be together, we ought to be smart enough to come together. It's time to do the ACLU. Challenge love. Amen. People were wrestling and getting tired of fighting for women's suffrage. And Mother Jones said, in essence, she said, it's time to do the ACLU. She told the organization she was with, because some of them said, well, let's pray. And Mother Jones said, we don't need your organization to pray. We need you to fight. She said, the only time you ought to be praying is you pray for the dead, but you fight like hell for the living. That's doing the ACLU. You fight like hell for the living. That's what it means to do the ACLU. Nelson Mandela did the ACLU all over in South Africa. He was in jail. They thought they were going to kill him, depress him, break his spirit. He started getting up in that jail, those confines, and preparing himself to be president. He fought from the jail, and he first fought them mentally and spiritually. He would get up in the morning, look at those bars, and instead of crying and whimpering, he would say, out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fair clutches of circumstance, I've not winced or cried aloud under the bludgeonings of chance. My head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horrors of the shade, and yet the menace of the years shall find me and find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, nor how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. That's doing the ACLU. Is never believing that injustice has the last word. Tell you somebody else who did the ACLU. Harry Tubman. I got a movie coming out. Hope y'all go see it on the 1st. But let me break it down for you Southern style. Harry Tubman didn't have much. She had epilepsy. Every now and then she'd fall out, just stay out. How can you lead people and sometimes you just fall out? She didn't have a lot of money. All she had was a made-up mind. She had what my grandmama called a strong constitution. She believed in God. She believed that people weren't meant to enslave people.